Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Mayank and I'm a final year student in the HEC Paris MiM program majoring in marketing. If you're gonna study in France, one thing that you should know is that if you know French, your experience improves tremendously. And it's only then that you're actually able to extract the full potential of your time over here. When I came to France more than 2 years ago, I had a level of A1, which is the most basic level that you can have. Right now, I'm at a level of almost B2, and that means that I'm more or less conversational. In this video, I'm gonna get into exactly that. I'm gonna give you my tips and advice on how you can improve your French at a faster than usual pace, just like I did. Before I get started, I also want to remind you that you may want to follow me on Instagram and perhaps consider joining my mailing list, where I'm gonna be sharing with you my current thoughts, resources, and inspirations. With that out of the way, let's jump straight right into it. The first set of tips that I'm gonna give you are gonna be applicable when you're an absolute beginner. Number one, learn as much French as you can before coming to France. Of course, it's only after you actually get here that you can improve further much better, but learning up to A1 or even A2 before coming here gives you a really good head start, so you don't have to worry about the basics when you're actually here. Because the basic levels are such that they can be learnt in class. They don't really require a lot of conversational and real-world practice. If you get done with all that stuff before arriving in France, once you actually get here, you can focus on much more important things. I would highly recommend reaching out to the Alliance Française in the city that you're living in. It's there in most major cities, and I would recommend enrolling yourself in those classes because they're really, really good. Tip number two, join classes in France once you get here. Thankfully for me, at HEC Paris, for anyone below a level of B1, it was mandatory to take 2 levels of French classes to get up to that level. And the classes were actually pretty good. Oh, and the classes were also free. So that definitely worked out really well. You know, it makes a huge difference when you're actually learning French from a French teacher, and going to class every week helps you stay on top of things. Because if you're attending classes in English, like for me at HEC, it gets really easy to not focus on French at all because you don't actually need it. But enrolling in classes helps you stay on top of it and gives you a supportive environment in which to learn French. Tip number 3, keep trying to use French whenever you get the opportunity to, even if you know you're gonna mess up. Whenever you go into the city of Paris, try to use French wherever you can. At bus stops, at restaurants with waiters, waitresses, random people on the street, ask people for directions. Find any excuse that you can to use your French, even if you know you're gonna mess up. Because the objective in the beginning is to get used to speaking French and remove the fear of messing up, because it's gonna be quite some time before you're gonna be able to speak fluently, but you're not gonna get there unless you practice. Also, you just need to get your point across. You don't need to do it perfectly. You just need to make sure that the other person understands you. Okay, so once you've grasped the basics of the language, you're at a point where you're not just like a basic level learner. Here are some tips of how you can take it further. First one, stop auto-translating the websites in French that you visit. So if you've been living in France, or if you haven't, you should know this, you're gonna come across a lot of things regarding administrative work, regarding non-administrative work. It's all gonna be in French. And Google Chrome has this really nifty feature where it auto-translates the websites that you're visiting that aren't in English. Don't use that feature. Force yourself to try and understand what's actually on the page. Use a dictionary, or you can type in individual phrases on Google Translate. Not the entire thing, but like individual phrases or words. Use Google Translate as a dictionary so that over time, when you come across the same words and phrases again, you're gonna know what they mean. Pro tip, if you're using a Mac, you can install a French to English dictionary into your inbuilt dictionary app. And then you can force click to look up any word that you come across, and you'll immediately get the English translation. Basically just like using an actual dictionary, but much faster and quicker. You can also type in words into Spotlight search and get the translation or the meaning almost immediately. And I find these functions tremendously useful, and with them it's really, really easy to actually stick with not auto-translating. It's like looking things up individually. Tip number 2, read children's books. Learning a language is actually like being a child again, since you're basically learning how to talk a second time. And what better way to practice these new skills that you're gaining by reading children's books? So, children's books actually contain words and phrases that are much easier to understand because, you guessed it, they're aimed at children. I found that a lot of children's books can actually be really interesting to read. They give you an insight into French culture and at the same time teach you some basic vocabulary. Tip number 3, set up a weekly French speaking session. When I moved to Los Angeles in 2019, I was a bit worried that I was gonna lose out on my French because I would not be using it on a daily basis. And so I went to meetup.com and I found like this French speakers meetup. At that meetup, which I didn't like very much, I found 2 other guys who also didn't like the meetup very much, but the 3 of us, we vibed together really well. So the 3 of us decided to meet every single week at a happy hour at some cafe in Santa Monica, grab a cocktail and speak in French for 2 hours. And I found that this French speaking session helped out a lot in maintaining and even improving my French skills. It was also incredibly fun because all three of us were at pretty much the same level of French. And it was super fun to try and figure out how to express what we wanted to say in French because we wanted to have a fun conversation, but we wanted to do it in French. So it became a really cool way to remember the words that you need to convey what you want to say. However, I would say that you should keep the group relatively small. I feel like 3 to 4 people max is the ideal amount because then beyond that it's just going to become too complicated. Tip number 4. Make some French friends and talk to them in French. This sounds like a no-brainer, but if you're living in France, you know that it's not always easy to do that. So you're gonna have to make a bit of an effort to do it because it doesn't normally naturally happen. When you're hanging out with your French friends, set aside like 10, 15 or 20 minute periods where both of you decide that yeah, we're just gonna speak in French. You know, you can't speak in French all the time because you're not a fluent speaker and you're not gonna be able to have like a normal conversation. So it's good to set realistic expectations and set aside just like 10 or 15 minutes to talk in French. Of course, you're gonna need supportive friends who agree to do this with you. And yeah, that's just on your luck and on your skills of making friends. But I can say that I'm really lucky to have a couple of friends who are like that for me. Next tip, continue using French wherever you're able to. Again, the objective is to get your point across, not for it to be perfect. The perfection will come eventually. But for now, you just want to make sure that the other person can understand what you're trying to say. If this means replacing the word library with room full of books that I can borrow from, then so be it. At least the other person can understand what you're saying. Don't stop practicing. Last tip for this section, keep attending French classes of higher levels. Again, it's kind of a no-brainer, but you know, it's only in French classes that you can actually learn the grammar and advanced vocabulary that you need. And that you're probably not gonna learn in your day-to-day interactions. So yeah, you shouldn't stop classes until you reach at least B2 or even C1 or C2 if you want to do that. Alright, so you heard my tips for when you're a beginner and when you've already grasped the basics. Now let's take it one step further. These tips are useful when you're already at like an intermediate level. Number 1, listen to podcasts and YouTube channels. The podcast that I would highly recommend starting with is called the Intermediate French Podcast, and you guessed it, it's for intermediate level learners. It's spoken with a slightly easier to understand accent, vocabulary, as well as the speed. And the same person who makes this podcast has a really interesting YouTube channel called Inner French. And it's a great way to practice your French listening and also learn a lot about French culture at the same time. Ooh, I want to mention that the YouTube videos and the podcast, they talk about general, fun, interesting, normal topics. So it's not boring stuff that you're gonna have to like force yourself to listen to. It's actually interesting stuff. Another YouTube channel that I watch is called Steven. And this guy is like a tech YouTuber in French. And so if you like technology, if you like MKBHD kind of stuff, but you want to do it in French, this guy is like really good for that. I think the language in his videos is slightly more advanced because it's not a French learning channel, it's like an actual French channel, but it's something that I found that I could understand with not too much difficulty actually. My last tip is to watch French Netflix. So there's this Google Chrome extension called Language Learning with Netflix, which allows you to watch a Netflix series and see subtitles in 2 languages, one that you're fluent in and one that you're practicing. This is actually really helpful to learn new words and also just enjoy the series that you're watching. The same extension also allows you to skip forward and backward by the word and not by a fixed, number of seconds like what Netflix already allows you to do. And so this makes it really useful to go back and try to understand how certain words are pronounced or if you miss something. A French series that I really enjoyed watching is called Call My Agent in English or 10% in French. And on Netflix, I'm sure you can find a lot of other movies and TV series to watch. But this one's just one of my favorites. However, I do find that, watching French Netflix requires a much more advanced level of French than watching, say, YouTube or like that one podcast I told you about. So yeah, it can be a bit taxing to watch French Netflix. It's a bit of like, it takes effort to do it because you're gonna have to like pause and, go back and try to understand things. But, if you can do that, it's a great way to learn vocabulary as well. This is how I went from like scratch, knowing nothing in French, to almost B2 in less than 3 years. Like at this point, I've basically changed the language on my phone to French and I have no problems. I can read in French, I can write in French, I can write emails, I can get administrative work done, I can ask people for directions, I can have conversations about things, maybe not too complicated things, but things. And yeah, I don't think I'm at a point where I can work 100% in French yet, but I think I'm getting there really soon. And if you follow these tips, you can do it too. It's really not that hard. It just takes dedication and effort and also the time investment to do it. With these tips, you can do it in a way that it just becomes a part of your life and not like an extra effort. So if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. It really helps me out with the algorithm and everything. And consider hitting that subscribe button because I'll be uploading a lot more content just like this every single week. Alright, see you guys in the next one.